Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. We're taking a look at the roster trends from the moves made on fantasy football leagues on CBSSports.com on Tuesday night. We're going to show you the most added, most dropped, and most traded players, and we'll discuss some of these players. And remember, a lot of leagues run waivers on Wednesday, so this could help you with some of your waiver wire decisions. So let's take a look at the most added players here. And in full disclosure, we're 10 weeks into the season now. We only look at this list for the first time when they show it to us on the graphics here. So we'll just have some fun with this. Let's talk about the wide receivers at the top here. Demarcus Robinson, Quentin Johnson. We already told you that Mike Gesicki's a great start heading into that Thursday game against the Ravens. But Heath, I'll start with you. Demarcus Robinson's got 4 touchdowns in his last 2 games. It just seems that when Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are on the field, he finds a way to get into the end zone. And last year, 4 of the final 5 games, he scored 4 touchdowns as well. So it's not fluky. There is a little bit of a track record here. We don't want to chase touchdowns. He did have 9 targets in the game where Punch and Nacua got thrown out for throwing a punch. But is Demarcus Robinson somebody that you want on your team?
The 9 targets from last week interest me a lot more than the 4 touchdowns from the last 2 games, because I do think you're right. We don't want to chase touchdowns. He's not someone that I'm ranking as someone I would want to start this week. I expect that Puka and Cooper Kupp are going to probably touch the ball 18 times in this game, and so Robinson will need a touchdown.
Robert, have you ever seen a player get thrown out for a weaker punch than what Nacua happened to him last week in that game against Seattle?
Probably, but that was one of the top 3 weakest to get thrown out of a game for sure.
Yes.
That was bad.
So we'll see if Demarcus Robinson can continue to produce. Somebody worth adding, but not necessarily the top receiver to get. I think the top receiver, Robert, is the guy right below him in Quentin Johnston, because we saw a 100-yard game, not a lot of targets, but he's somebody that has now had 2 games with over 22 PPR points on the season, and Justin Herbert's starting to throw the ball a lot more and a lot better. How much are you interested in Quentin Johnston this week taking on the Tennessee Titans?
Not much, if I'm being honest with you. I'm actually more interested in Demarcus Robinson, and I'd rather roster him and have him on my bench. I feel like he's going to get the consistent targets more than Quentin Johnson is. I just feel like you just never know what you're going to get from Johnston. At least I know with the Rams, Robinson is going to get the targets. But for me to wait for those big games for Johnston, not really in my interest as a fantasy manager.
And that's, I think, where a lot of people are, and we can factor in Xavier Legette as well, another player who's getting a lot of traction based on what he's done, 4 touchdowns in his last 6 games. So Heath, Johnston, Legette, Demarcus Robinson, rank those 3 guys for me, and then take me through Xavier Legette's outlook taking on the Giants this week.
So I'll go Johnston, then Legette, and then I'll go Robinson third. And I will say, just in Johnston's defense, like earlier in the year when he was playing and he was seeing 4 or 5 targets, they were only throwing the ball 25 times a game, and then he missed time, and the offense was a little bit more pass heavy. I love the fact that his 8 out dots come down, which has allowed his yak to go up. That's the type of wide receiver he is. They really used him the wrong way. I wish Legette could get Andy Dalton back starting, and I'd feel a little bit better about him. This is a pretty decent opportunity against the Giants if you need to use him as a number 3 or a flex. But rest of season, I'd feel a lot better about it if he didn't have Bryce Young throwing the ball.
You feel the same way, Robert, that Legette with Andy Dalton's a little bit more safety, a little bit more safe in terms of what the upside could be?
I do, but we can't ignore the improvement that the Carolina Panthers are showing right now with Bryce Young at the quarterback position. So I would go Legette number 1, Robinson 2, and Johnston 3 in that scenario.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where fantasy managers are. You're looking for a high upside number 3 receiver, touchdowns in the favor of Robinson, maybe some production across the board in favor of Johnston and Legette. And for what it's worth, in terms of touchdowns, again, Legette has 4 touchdowns in his last 6 games, so he's doing a good job despite minimal targets as well, finding the end zone. But all 3 of these guys worth picking up if you need a wide receiver. A lot of bye weeks coming up, and remember, 4 teams on a bye in week 10. Let's show you the most dropped list, and there are always some players on this list. We may say, hold on, pump the brakes. You don't want to get rid of them just yet. Understandably so, some defense kickers. Zach Moss out for the rest of the regular season here. Jalen McMillan is interesting, Heath, because did not play in week 9. We have a game in week 10 against the 49ers, not easy for the Bucks. Week 11, they're on a bye. Week 12, Mike Evans comes back. Are you getting rid of Jalen McMillan also?
Yeah. I think this might be the week where we look at this list and say, nope, you can go ahead and drop all these guys. Everybody's right. Because, I think because of the difficult matchup, then the bye, then the expectation that Evan's back, and Cade Otton is we were like, which wide receiver is going to take the Chris Godwin role? Well, it turned out it was a tight end. It was Cade Otton taking all those targets and red zone area targets. So he's a desperation flex, McMillan.
All right, hopefully he plays this week and we get to see a little bit of that upside, because he was the one that was at least pegged for that slot role to replace Chris Godwin. Robert, when you look at, we'll just circle back, since if anybody missed the start of the show, Dak Prescott expected to go on IR. If you have an IR spot, are you willing to stash Dak Prescott, or are you just saying I'm done with it and I'm just going to find another quarterback rest of the season?
Yeah, I'm going to drop Dak Prescott, find another quarterback. Maybe it's Tua Tagovailoa or somebody else. But Dak Prescott not on my roster anymore now that he's going on IR.
Yeah, and there is the risk of, again, Cowboys 3-5. If they lose the next 4 games, or the majority of the next 4 games until Dak does return, does he even come back and play this season? They just shut him down and maybe say, okay, you're done until 2025. All right, let's show you the list of most traded players here, and there are always some interesting players that are being either sold high or dealt low. And I think that's the case of DeAndre Hopkins, who's a great sell high candidate. Tank Bigsby, Nick Chubb, probably more of the buy low variety. Same thing with Jalen Waddle. Adams, Hunt, more of the sell high variety. Marvin Harrison, Tyreek Hill, buy low. Chris Olave, buy low. Chase Brown, probably buy high, I guess. Heath, when it comes to DeAndre Hopkins, are you looking to unload him right now, coming off the 2-touchdown game he just had in a very favorable matchup against Tampa Bay?
I mean, I think in more casual leagues, if somebody sees that name, sees what he just did, thinks Patrick Mahomes, and views him as like, this might be DeAndre Hopkins turning back into DeAndre Hopkins again, then I could see maybe trying to sell high. But man, he's looked really good so far, and the Chiefs are desperate for help at wide receiver. So if he can stay healthy, I do think he's a starting wide receiver rest of season, just probably more of a number 2 than the number 1 he used to be.
And I do think if you're trying to buy low on him, you might want to wait a week, because the matchup with Denver is probably going to be tough. You could see a little bit of Patrick Surtain. We know how that's gone for the bigger physical receivers. So Surtain could make things uncomfortable for Hopkins, minimal production. You might be able to get him in 2 weeks. But if you are trying to sell him at his highest value, this might be his highest value, again, coming off the 2-touchdown game against Tampa Bay. Robert, we got a problem with Jalen Waddle, because Devon Achane is soaking up all those targets. Tyreek Hill is still getting his opportunities, not producing yet, but I think that will come. Are you looking to buy low on Jalen Waddle, knowing what he can be? Or are you just saying, okay, this is what the Dolphins offense is. Tua's getting the ball out quick. It's not going to Jalen Waddle, and I can't trust him.
I think that I'm looking at other options. I think that we have to come to grips that this is what the Dolphins offense is going to look like. Not saying that Jalen Waddle won't have good games, because he will. He'll have some big games, but not really an interest for me. If it were my roster, I'd pass and look elsewhere.
And Robert, how do you feel about Nick Chubb going into his bye week? Hasn't had the big game yet. I know you were very excited about him coming back, as a lot of fantasy managers were as well. Hopefully another week of rest, maybe the best of Nick Chubb yet to come. Great matchup coming off the bye against the Saints. Is he somebody you're looking to target?
Absolutely. I think he's getting his legs under him. I think he'll still be on fire after the bye week. But I'll tell you what, the surprise that was on that list is Brian Robinson Jr. If you're trying to sell on him right now, I know he's been dinged up. I'd keep him on my roster. That'd be somebody that I'm looking out for in the trade as well if I can acquire him.
You agree?
Yeah, I think his value has gone down really only because he's been banged up. There's no reason to doubt the production. When he comes back, he's going to touch the ball 15 to 20 times again, and it's a great offense. All
right, so hopefully Brian Robinson can play. A lot of us were chasing Jeremy McNichols. Then it was Chris Rodriguez Jr. Really to get a semblance of who's going to be the guy that steps up in his place. Maybe we get an answer this week if Robinson's out again, but we'd like to see him taking on the Steelers, even in a tough matchup. Austin Eckler, though, would be a good start if Robinson does miss Week 10. All right, let's answer one of your questions. Thank you for sending them to us on X, Twitter, using the hashtag AskFFT. Would you trade Marvin Harrison Jr. for Jackson Smith-Njigba? Lots of initials there. So, Robert, which wide receiver would you rather have, MHJ or JSN?
I mean, I'd rather have MHJ, even though I did trade him, but I'd rather have him over JSN.
100%. I think the Arizona Cardinals, specifically the passing game, one of the best buys right now in fantasy. They have a fantastic schedule after their Week 11 bye. Things are going to get a lot better for Kyler and for Marvin Harrison Jr.
All right, hopefully Kyler throws the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. He needs 6+
right.
targets. When he gets 6+ targets, he's been excellent. 5 or less, just not gone well for him, and then he had 5 targets or less in week number 9 against the Bears. Give him 6 targets against the Jets. All right, we'll take a break right now. We come back and get into our running back roundtable. Robert Turbin will give us some answers on some questionable running back situations. That's next here on Fantasy Football Today.